here we are with John Avlon. John is running for Congress in the US. So we'll be talking all about crypto and politics in such an important year for the topic. John, it's so great to have you here on the Defiant podcast. Welcome.
It's great to be with you, Kamala. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So like I said, John was a journalist, so I'm here with a colleague. He was a commentator on politics, and like I said, he's running for congressman in the U.S. House, representing New York, and he's looking to unseat the current congressman for the Republican side, Nick LaLota. So John is a Democrat. So there's so much writing in this election for crypto. I'd love for you to break down why this is a pivotal moment for the space.
Well, I think it's a pivotal moment, period. This is a pivotal moment for American democracy. This is a pivotal moment for our economy. But part of the reason that I think we need to make sure that there's broad bipartisan support for crypto is because we can't allow technology to become partisan. I'm a centrist. I believe we need to depolarize the conversation around a lot of our problems, but it makes no sense for Democrats to be on the back foot when it comes to technology. Not only do we need broad bipartisan support for technological innovation, traditionally we've been the party of the future, of the innovation, right? I mean, conservatives seek to conserve, and liberals seek to liberate. I mean, that's now I'm a centrist. I believe there's a wise balance between these things, which is probably in this case reasonable regulation. But my background is, I was the editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast. I've worked in digital media most of my life. The idea that we would make any technology partisan is so self-defeating, not only politically for the Democratic Party, but for the country, because technology is national security. We're losing a competitive edge in the United States if we force these sort of technological innovations overseas. So we need a stable, clear, and effective regulatory framework. And I don't think Gary Gensler and that crew has done a good job of providing that. But I think there's the opportunity in this election, and we're beginning to see the seeds of a broader bipartisan support, and that's what I'm committed to being part of. And as it turns out, my Republican opponent was one of 3 Republicans to vote against FIT 21. So he's on the wrong side of this issue, and it's an opportunity to make sure we get more Democrats in who understand that we need to lean into technology. We need to be a leader, not a follower, and that means clear, stable regulation. And there were over 70 Democrats who supported FIT 21, including Nancy Pelosi. And so I think the opportunity is to make sure that we have more broad bipartisan support, which means being more forward-leading and comfortable with new technology as opposed to trying to resist change.
So if you can go a bit deeper on, where you stand regarding to crypto, how you think it should be regulated, because you talk about sensible regulation. What does that mean for you? There's some key issues that have been discussed, like KYC for money transmitters, money laundering rules, and so on. So like regulation for stable coins, like these key issues. Where do you stand? Like where do you think it would benefit the U.S. the most for policy to stand?
Absolutely. So first of all, I would have voted for FIT 21. I think that's essential legislation just to sort of establish clear rules of the road on how we treat crypto. I think KYC, and again, my opponent voted against it, rather inexplicably. One of 3 Republicans to do so, where over 70 Democrats supported it. I would add to that caucus. I think KYC makes all the sense in the world, right? Because in any time of great technological change, there's concerns about the innovation and a lack of trust. And there's no one in the realm of clear, reasonable regulation that allows people to innovate within a structured space. KYC, I think, does make sense because no one in the community really wants, whether it's terrorists or human traffickers or drug smugglers, to be undercutting trust in cryptocurrencies, because that's going to be difficult for the evolution of this technological innovation. So I think KYC does make sense. Senator Gillibrand here in New York has worked with Loomis to create a legislation creating the basis for stablecoin legislation. I think that legislation makes sense looking forward. But I think those are 3 pieces of legislative building blocks. And then obviously there's the regulatory piece. But it makes no sense to try to sort of kill a new technology in its crib through lack of clear regulation. All people are asking for are clear rules of the road. I think there are a lot of things in our country right now. We need to strengthen guardrails. In the case of a new technology, where inherently legislation always lags new technology, for the U.S. to be a leader, which is what we should be in all new technology, we have been historically, all the community's asking for is clear, reasonable rules of the road so that people know what to work around, and they don't think that they'll get some kind of undercutting their effort because the rules are changed in the middle of the game. So that's a responsible basic role of government.
So regarding KYC, I think the concern in the crypto industry comes from who you are asking KYC from. So I think there's there's a major division between custodial services and non-custodial services. So obviously, custodial services, they custody customer funds, and the largest companies in this space are cryptocurrency exchanges like Coinbase and so on. But then there's the non-custodial side where, users custody their own funds, and what you're dealing with here is, just directly with blockchain smart contracts, and maybe a company that builds an interface to access those smart contracts, but those companies are not actually holding user funds. So the concern in the industry with regards to KYC is if you're asking non-custodial wallets to perform KYC on users, then you're essentially killing that service. So do you distinguish between those? Or?
Well, I think all reasonable regulation is about achieving a wise balance. And by the way, part of being an effective legislature is listening to experts. And legislators are not issue experts in all areas, let alone most. I mean, part of my frustration at the current debate we're having is it reminds me a little bit about the early days of the internet when Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska was infamously quoted as describing it as a series of tubes. And even if he was sort of speaking, it was a bad metaphor on a good day. But I do have a background in digital media. And so, for example, with regard to algorithms or blockchains, these are not foreign concepts to me. But how you achieve that wise balance requires listening to people who are experts like yourself in the area. Because, it is, Tommy Lasorda once said, he was a baseball manager for the Los Angeles Dodgers. I'm a Yankees fan. But he said that leadership is like holding a dove. If you hold it too tightly, you kill the dove. If you hold it too loosely, the dove flies away. And I think that's true for getting the right wise balance and regulation as well. Nobody wants to make sure that cryptocurrencies are fueling human trafficking or terrorism. But the reasonable concerns around too invasive legislation, that is where we need to listen to issue experts to make sure we're getting the right wise balance. And I think that's just a principle of wise legislating, is listening to people who are issue experts.
Absolutely. Okay, so you advocate for listening to experts in order to craft the kind of the right regulatory balance, framework for the industry.
Look, I think what government does a bad job managing innovation. Right. What it can do a very good job is creating the context and the constructs with which to encourage innovation. And that's where the focus should be. Clear rules of the road. I mean, I think that's really all the industry has been asking for. Just clear, common sense rules of the road that don't stifle innovation. Right? They don't strangle innovation. I mean, you're creating a context, and that kind of stable construct would just allow the innovation that is occurring anyway to proliferate. Otherwise, we push it overseas. And again, that's bad for U.S. national competitiveness. And that's one of the things that sort of drove me into this space. The idea that we're, making technology partisan makes no sense to me as someone with a background in digital media. And it just shows sort of a resistance to change and an understanding of history, and I'm a part-time historian, shows that, if you try to deny change, you end up on not only on the back foot, but on the wrong side of history. What you want to do is figure out how to, as much as possible, how to channel it in a constructive direction, and that's all I think the industry is asking for, and that's totally beyond reasonable. It's necessary for America to take advantage of the ingenuity, let alone the people that, millions of people who own cryptocurrencies right now, and rather than forcing the ingenuity overseas, which will put us at a competitive disadvantage at a time when there is a global struggle between autocracies and democracies. Democracies should be leaning into freedom, and we can take advantage of that and innovative engine.
In the past couple of years, I think this the reason why crypto has become a partisan issue, I think, is because how hostile the Biden administration has been to the industry, and Democratic lawmakers and politicians have. Many of them have been also very hostile to the industry. There's Elizabeth Warren with her, anti-crypto army, and all these efforts. The suspicion that there was this, concerted effort to crack down on the industry with Choke Point 2.0. So that paints a very bleak picture for where Democrats stand in the industry.
I think that's been a big problem. Again, we can't make new technology partisan. I don't think Gary Gensler speaks for the entire Democratic Party. I don't think Elizabeth Warren speaks for the entire Democratic Party. I think there's a certain irony with Elizabeth Warren, seeming to be on the same side with big banks, given the historic tension there, right? And look, let's assume a degree of goodwill, even if this is democracy depends on an assumption of goodwill, right? But then actually figuring out where we differ, and also looking at the unintended consequences of actions, which inevitably happens. Trying to stifle or contain innovation, refusing to, I think, take the opportunity to have clear regulation and rules of the road has caused a massive political backlash. Now, and that has made technology partisan, which we can't do. The fact that more than 70 Democrats voted for FIT 21, and again, my opponent did not, as one of 3 Republicans, I think indicates that this is becoming increasingly bipartisan. And there's a generational divide. Rokan has spoken about this a lot. There's a generational divide that I think speaks to a certain comfort or discomfort with new technologies. So if you look at, in the Senate, Cory Booker and Kirsten Gillibrand, they've been leaders of this on the Democratic side. I think that reflects the fact that they are more comfortable with new technology and don't want to stifle it, right? A lot of times people oppose what they don't understand. And then again, that gets you on the back foot with trying to constrain innovation, which inevitably doesn't work, right? You've got to, again, work with change. I think Warren and Gensler, understanding you need to protect consumers, consumers need to be protected. I don't think there's great disagreement about that. The question is, if you're not actually creating really clear rules of the road and you're resisting that kind of change, then you get unintended consequences, as we've discussed. But if you look generationally, look at, there are a lot of different examples. From outside government, there's, Mike Novogratz, but there's, Dan Goldman. Again, a younger sort of generational peer. You're looking at sort of Gen X and younger Democrats who understand that we need to depolarize this. Richie Torres, another great example, someone who's been a leader on this issue because generationally he understands it. And I think Gensler and Warren and certainly Biden are of a different generation. I think Kamala Harris, coming from a Silicon Valley and sort of Bay Area background, while I don't think she's been specific enough about the plans, I think clearly has a different comfort level and attitude towards new technologies. She is, former Alameda prosecutor, but she's from the Bay Area. She's peers with a lot of these people and friends and colleagues with people who are in that sort of technological hotbed, which is innovated. And so I do think there would be a decidedly different posture. There's every reason to believe there's not a lot of love within the Democratic Party for Gensler's approach on this. In fact, I think people recognize that it's not just a political, but an economic and national security liability to try to resist offering clear rules of the road and regulation for cryptocurrencies. Putting aside the failure of FTX, I think that's why we all need to recognize we need consumer protections, right? We need to depolarize this debate. And trusting Donald Trump seems to me to be a fool's errand, right? I
definitely wanna get into that, but before that, so let's take Gensler. because like FTX was a huge failure, and I think the frustration in the crypto industry is why isn't the SEC going after the actual bad guys and instead going after some of the companies that are trying to do things by the book? Like they're going after Coinbase, they're going after Uniswap, and they just like let FTX do whatever and steal $3 billion. So
Look, I think that's where the obvious, reasonable, rational frustration comes from. Right? And look, in any technology that's moving as quickly as crypto is, or let alone what we're coming down the pike with AI, government and technology is going to lag. And people, especially of a different generation, are going to have a hard time understanding what's happening. But that's why you need to, have issue experts inform the policies. And you need to make sure that the policies aren't designed to sort of be punitive or, even worse, punished through inexact, intentional failure, it seems, at times, to create clear rules of the road. I understand that frustration, but I don't think it's philosophically rooted in the Democratic Party. I think, indeed, the case I'm trying to make is that a new generation of Democrats are trying to depolarize this issue because they recognize it makes no sense for technology to become partisan. And I think it's, I think while Trump has picked this up opportunistically as an issue, he himself has flipped on this and so many other issues like TikTok or whatever else. We'll get to that later. But I think the opportunity is to support a new generation of Democrats who are trying to depolarize this, because I promise you this issue shouldn't be partisan and polarized. But I think the crypto community also needs to lean into making sure that there's broad-based bipartisan support for new technologies in crypto and blockchain. Like, that's how we solve this problem. That's how we break this impasse with generational change and advancing candidates who actually understand that this matters. That we are doing ourselves a national economic disservice if our country there's flight capital from the United States because of the lack of clarity in rules and regulations. That's not wise policy from a national strategic standpoint.
Absolutely.
So that's where I come from. And again, it's almost more using a lens of history and an understanding of digital technology rather than, that's what listening to experts on DeFi like yourself. Congress should do more listening before they legislate, and that goes for regulators doubly.
What would you say to people in crypto who are afraid of fully trusting what the Democratic Party or Kamala Harris is saying about crypto? Because this kind of shift towards being more crypto friendly apparently or seemingly came after Trump started becoming more pro-crypto. So it just felt like it was a response to that rather than a genuine realization of, okay, we actually need this technology to stay competitive.
So I'd say two things. One, I think the generational change that we talked about is partly at work too, right? I mean, you had Booker and Torres and Gillibrand and others who were Democrats who were good on crypto early on. It wasn't a reaction to what was perceived as a political problem. And I think Kamala Harris is decidedly a different generation, obviously, than Joe Biden, and comes from an area where she's deeply conversant with people who are innovative technology leaders. This is not somebody who's, doesn't understand the players in the space, even though they may have disagreements. The other thing I'd say, the words trust and Donald Trump have a hard time being in the same sentence with any sense of perspective. And I would be very careful about saying, well, he's good on my issue, especially given that he, not so long ago was hostile to crypto, again, from a lack of understanding. He saw a political opening clearly. But throwing all your eggs in that basket is a bad idea. It's bad for policy. It's bad for politics. Again, there's a generation of Democrats who are trying to make sure that Democrats are on the right side of this issue. But if you end up empowering, Donald Trump politically and vote, and support Republicans in a blanket way, you're getting a lot of other things along with what you think will be better crypto legislation, right? I mean, you're getting, you're empowering folks who've led an assault on reproductive freedom. You're empowering a candidate who tried to overturn an election on the back of a lie. Someone who's talked about, prosecuting and imprisoning political opponents. Somebody who's, who's talking about undercutting NATO. And empowering autocrats throughout the world. So you don't take it a la carte, right? That's what I'm saying. If you want to empower people on the center left who understand, the importance of crypto, that's a good counterweight. The smart thing to do is to make sure you're backing candidates who offer a understanding that there needs to be broad bipartisan support for this new technology. But if the crypto community gets partisan about this and ends up de facto backing Donald Trump and Republicans, they're getting everything else. And they shouldn't be in denial about that. Because if you don't have a stable liberal democracy and an alliance of democracies that value the rule of law and predictability, I mean, that's actually a larger danger to the growth of any technology, because you need a stable regulatory framework and a stable system of rules of laws in order to achieve the kind of broad-based prosperity and innovation we're looking for. There's a reason that innovators do better in liberal democracies than they do in autocracies, because the inherent unpredictability of autocracies ends up cutting off the head of the people who've innovated when they become threats to the government. So let's just be careful about creating a rationalization that throws in with a series of extremes that are contrary to the values the crypto industry is actually trying to advance.
Hey everyone, I'm Ilya, and I'm inviting everyone to Bangkok, November 9 to 11.
You've been duped into thinking anything decentralized was ever gonna work. There's a better way. Stop wasting your time with all this blockchain and go back to the norm. Get a latte and stop trying to change the world. Oh, and this thing in November, Redacted, the hackathon, they're cushy office jobs out there, Everything is working as it should.
For our special event, Redacted. We're gonna dive into AI, we're gonna dive into Web3, chain abstraction, decentralization, and user-owned AI. I'll see you there.
If somebody is voting just based on crypto regulation and policies for Trump, you don't think that the outcome for them would be better with Trump? If say that Trump did follow through with what he's saying in crypto, and he changes Gary Gensler in the first day, and I don't know, he's made a series of promises. Say that he actually does follow through with that. But also, as you said, it comes with all of the other policies and ideas that we've seen. How do you think that person would fare compared to if Kamala Harris won?
I think the world that their children will grow up in will be far worse, even if they believe they will be wealthier in the short run. If they care about climate change, if they care about reproductive freedom, if they care about democracy standing up to autocracies, if they care about the stability and the rule of law, they need to think about the broader-based implications. And the reason I think it's so critical for Democrats to not buy into this false duality, and it is a false duality, again, with a rising generation of Democrats, which I'm trying to make the case for, to say that we cannot polarize politically on the issue of crypto or any new technology. There is no sense that Gary Gensler is going to be head of the SEC, even if Kamala Harris is president. Right? This is, that's
you
not.
You think so?
Yes. I mean, has anyone said anything to the contrary? Is Kamala Harris saying, if I'm elected, Gary Gensler stand right where he is?
But I don't think she said that. I don't think she said otherwise either.
I think she's trying not to undercut her predecessor's appointee. But first of all, in any new administration, a president makes their own appointees. Right? So there almost certainly will be a change, unless that person is so closely aligned with that person philosophically. And there's no sense or sign of that. I mean, one of the first things when this unusual midsummer transition happened is that Kamala Harris tried to make it clear that, particularly on issues of technology, that she was in a very different place as a matter of instinct and experience than Joe Biden, which makes sense because they're totally different generations and from totally different places. So I just be careful about flying into that false choice. And indeed, that's the case I'm trying to make, is we need to have an off-ramp from that false choice. And it comes from supporting a new generation of Democrats who are decidedly pro-crypto, because they understand that we cannot make technology a partisan issue, that's bad for everybody. And so I just think that that's a good opportunity. Look, on individual candidates running for Congress or Senate, judge them by their record. Absolutely. But don't create a rationalization that a vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for Gary Gensler, because it's not. And you need to think about the total world that's being created. And I think we've seen a lot of movement. Democrats are moving on this issue, and they should. I'm arguing for that, because we need bipartisan support. But if the crypto investor, hypothetically, that you just spoke of, is looking for stable regulatory environment. What they really want is broad bipartisan support for cryptocurrencies and clear, reasonable regulation. If it's a partisan issue, it's going to be perpetually a problem, because then when the parties change, if it remained partisan and polarized, it would be inherently unstable. So the interest is in creating broad bipartisan support for clear, reasonable regulation, and that's what's in the process of being born. If putting all your eggs in the basket of Donald Trump when he's famously unpredictable, right? I mean, he was banning TikTok before he was for it when he got $400 million, to support it. I mean, this is somebody who's not a principles-based politician, and putting too much trust in them keeping his word seems like a fool's errand judged by the lessons of recent history. And again, it's about the total world that is being created and what you think of that. There are going to be some folks, vote out people who voted against crypto if they're your local representative. Vote for people who are in favor of crypto, but also make sure you're creating a bipartisan basis of support, because that's the surest way to get things done. Because very often in the United States, we've got divided government. And so it makes sense to identify you've got allies on both sides of the aisle. And I understand people's frustration around the past 4 years in the crypto community with Gensler. I get it. But I think increasingly a large number of Democrats do. And that's healthy. That's the kind of change we need to see.
What can the crypto industry, participants in the crypto industry, do to further that bipartisan support?
Support Democrats who are pro-crypto to make sure this isn't partisan and polarized. It can't be. It shouldn't be.
Besides, donating is one way. Do you think there needs to be more educational efforts?
Yes.
What do you think of the crypto lobby so far? There's been crypto has become slowly more political in the past couple of years. I think I started covering crypto day to day since 2017, and when I started, crypto was decidedly apolitical. It felt like its own separate world, but now it's becoming more and more part of the real world, quote unquote, and it does have a lobby, and it's becoming more powerful, better funded. But that's been pretty recent. I think maybe in the past year. What do you think of the crypto lobby? How should it? Does it have ways to go still? Do you think it's professional enough? Do you think it's well funded enough? What else can the industry do to?
I think it's very well funded, but that's not. Look, this is an emerging technology and an emerging industry that is beginning to express its political power as a reflection of its emerging power, right? The worst thing the crypto lobby can do, or the crypto community can do, is to be pushed into a hardline partisan position. I would argue particularly at this time, given these choices. This isn't Romney Obama or McCain Obama, right? And I do think the goal needs to be ensuring that we're moving towards clear, reasonable regulation that is market forces but isn't suffocated, right? That's that wise balance. And I think the biggest mistake the crypto community, the crypto lobby could make is throwing all in with Donald Trump's Republican Party. I think that perpetuates the polarization around this new technology when in fact the change we need to make is moving in the exact opposite direction. We need to be depolarizing. We need to be making sure there's broad bipartisan support for it, because that's how progress will be made, right? That's how we'll achieve something emerging a new consensus. And so that's I would encourage folks to strongly support those Democrats who are pro-crypto, because that's going to depolarize the conversation. Don't put too much faith in fair weather friends, especially taking a look at the rest of the package they're selling. And I think the fact you're seeing a growing cadre generationally of Democrats who are pro-crypto just because they understand we cannot make new technology partisan. That's a dumb idea, if judging by any form of history. And yes, of course, they're part of the lobbying. There needs to be better education. This is something that's radically different, right? Like AI, it's hard to get your head around how transformative it can and will be. Like AI, there needs to be clear, dynamic, but clear, framework of reasonable regulation so that there is increased trust, right? That's what we're talking about here, right? Because with any new technology like this, it's about trust. So the fact the industry's been asking for clear, reasonable regulation is what they're owed. So the innovation that exists can really take off, and we're not forcing that overseas. That puts the U.S. at a competitive disadvantage. That's one of my frustrations. Again, is understanding this through history's eyes. That, forcing innovation overseas is the way towards national decline. It's the opposite direction we should move in. But the thing that Donald Trump and the rest of his policies and the kind of change he represents is going to, move our nation forward in a more unified, constructive direction, I think ignores the evidence. And again, you need to take everything else into account. The Supreme Court justices, reproductive freedom, a stated goal to ignore climate change, a stated hostility to anything resembling democratic norms, and don't fall into that sort of that world where all of a sudden the guy who tried to overturn an election and disrupt the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in our country's history is the only one who's going to defend democracy. That's just. That's just a disinformation technique to confuse if you can't convince. So let's have a fact-based debate. Let's make sure, advance the candidates who care and understand about new technologies and also know enough to listen to issue experts, and that we need to create a stable framework. And this is not just going to be crypto, it's going to be AI too. These innovations are going to move much faster than our ability to legislate. So we need just a clear regulatory framework within which people can operate with a degree of predictability. And that requires better education. Not only of legislators, but of society.
I agree that's key. Legislators, politicians need to understand crypto a lot better in order to make sensible regulations and laws. So about that, you've talked about wise balance. Where do you think, from your view, and if you can speak to where the broader Democratic Party lies in this balance, where exactly is it? What's a wise balance in crypto to you? Where should things be regulated? What is considered a security? Which kinds of companies should go through KYC? Consumer protection, what does that mean? Protected from what? If you can, kind of outline a little bit.
Yeah, first of all, I'm just going to, things like FIT 21, I think, was an attempt, and quite a reasonable one, to establish sort of broad guidelines around what goes to the SEC and what's treated otherwise. And it's complex because we're dealing with new technologies and emerging forms. Again, this is an issue where I think achieving the wise balance means listening to issue experts and making sure what does consumer protection mean? It means that fraudsters aren't able to steal people's money, which, by the way, is bad for the entire industry. But you can't be driven by sort of a fear-based approach to new technology that seeks to deny all innovation because of a few bad actors. That's a fool's errand. So I would just say, for example, the Gillibrand-Loomis bill on stablecoin. I think that makes sense. I think Gillibrand and Booker and Torres have been, and Dan Goldman have been moving forward reasonably. I think the FIT 21 bill makes sense. I would vote for it. My opponent voted against it. I come here as someone who cares about the broad direction of the country, about making sure that we are competitive, that we're not stifling innovation. When it comes to the specifics of many of these bills, you and your guests are the experts. It's my job to learn from you on those specifics. I'm just telling you what the philosophy and approach, strategically and philosophically and politically, and to the extent that reflects on legislation and regulation, should be, according to me. I think if you look at the rising generation change of Democrats, I think you start to see that the party is not all one thing, and parties are never all one thing. They're constantly changing. When Abraham Lincoln created the Republican Party, it was a moderate progressive party designed to stop the spread of slavery, and Democrats were the conservative populists. Don't look for, those coalitions are constantly changing. That's part of the job of leaders and influencers and electeds to help bring about that change in a more constructive and sane direction.
Protocol 20 introduces Sorbonne, which is Stellar's cutting-edge smart contracts platform. This creates new surface area for innovation and provides new opportunities for developers to build protocols and products that create access to everyday financial services. So it means a gradual increase in transaction capacity and a chance to fine-tune applications. And it's the most transformative upgrade to the Stellar network to date.
speaking of, about like just like broadly, directionally, if you can tell, and yeah, we spoke before the call, so you know that I'm from Chile, so I have a bit of an outsider's perspective to U.S. politics, and from, what I see is Republicans are for more kind of laissez-faire, less government control, while Democrats are for
except on women's bodies, right?
Well, I mean, I guess, but that's kind of
you
the
don't guess. I
general
mean,
idea.
I'm making the point that I think those classical divisions don't really work because coalitions change over time.
So my question was, if that's true, which you can argue against that. So you don't think that the Democratic Party is more stands for more government control than the Republican Party?
No, because I think that I think if we were having a debate in the 1980s, there's philosophical consistency beneath that. But for example, I would argue that siding with autocrats in geopolitical struggles is not consistent with I would argue is the Truman, JFK, Reagan sort of Cold War liberalism and conservatism advancing freedom, right? And putting aside Chilean politics and the U.S.
A complicated relationship there,
Hashtag it's complicated. But I think if you look at, for example, I mean, part of what Republicans historically claimed to represent when it came to economics was fiscal responsibility. But actually, the last time we had a surplus was under a Democratic president with a Republican Congress. And actually, the idea that the markets do better under Republicans is false. It's done better under Democrats. And the last several Republican presidents have added dramatically to the deficit and the debt. So I think these narratives don't always work. I do think that one of the things Democrats need to do a better job of is be decidedly on the side of small businesses who are overburdened and overregulated because they get the burden of regulations that are designed for big businesses that can afford a phalanx of lawyers and accountants that small businesses can't. But I'm a centrist. I'm a vital center guy. I think center right and center left usually agree on far more than they do with the extremes of their own parties. And many folks in the center thinks that there's a lot of economic ideas you can borrow classically from aspects from Republicans and aspects from Democrats, and it's that dynamic exchange that makes it right. But the very idea, again, the reason I sort of pointed out that the Republican Party represents more freedom and less regulation, except over women's bodies. Well, that seems pretty germane to the national conversation right now, right? I mean, if government we're having a conversation about tracking women moving across state lines, to impose laws, that's not small government. That is not small government. So let's not rely on misty notions about what the parties support. Let's look at how legislation. Let's look at policies today. If some president's trying to actively meddle with the Fed through threatening and bullying, that's not a commitment to free markets. If they're actively saying that autocrats can invade smaller countries, that's not good for stability and the cause of freedom in the world. Right? In fact, I would argue one of the greater threats is the promise of people who are saying there can be wealth without liberty. And look, I am not a fan of the far left or the far right, but I also know that if you look at learn the right lessons of American history and world history, you got to stand up to aggression. And so I just don't. I think these sort of museum piece political dichotomies that are totally disconnected from this particular moment are a little bit dangerous. But instead, what we should be doing is just looking for the people who are trying to advance the policies that move us more towards common ground and sort of what has classically been liberal democracy, which is free markets and free people. And no one political party has ownership of that idea, particularly not right now.
That's good to hear for the industry, because I think the fear is in that there will be, if there's a democratic government, there will be more more government intervention in crypto businesses, in laws that businesses
Camilla,
will be
let me ask you this.
overburdened with
Yeah,
with
no,
laws
I think if I'm hearing you in the crypto industry correctly, all that the industry is asking for is clear, fair, reasonable regulation to create a stable framework within which innovation can really take place, right? And so we're not forcing this new technology overseas. Yes, let's do that. And by the way, I'm not a heavy regulation guy at all. I think that, government does a good job helping incubate innovation, right? DARPA, let's say, with the creation of the internet, does a really bad job managing it, right? My view of the proper role of government is to create a stable framework within which people can live their lives to the best of their ability. It's my personal definition of what government is. But it applies, I think, particularly to the right level of wise balance, like regulation, which is just guardrails, right? And that's all my understanding is what, from my friends in the industry and, who've, been around the industry, that's all that the industry's been asking for. And that's what they've been denied. And that's wrong. That's wrong.
Well, I really hope that legislators in your party and your party in general are aligned with that view. I think that would be beneficial for crypto and for the country more broadly. I
agree, and that's one of the reasons I'm running. So let's depolarize this issue. Let's not resist new technology, but lean into it. It's good for America. It's good for the industry. It's good for our national competitiveness, and especially support those Democrats who are pro-crypto, so we're depolarizing this. And that means also when my opponent has an F rating for Stand With Crypto and I have an A, don't look at the party label. Vote for the person. Vote for the policies.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough. I think it's lazy to paint, everyone on one side with the same brush and the same for the other side.
It's worse than lazy. I think it's counterproductive to the broader goal. And I think it's dangerous in this context.
For you personally, where do you think crypto stands, or what's crypto's role in finance and maybe just in broader tech and the web in the years to come?
I think it's obviously still evolving and emerging, and that's the part of the magic of free markets and free people is that it's not, you have a incredibly innovative, disruptive new technology that upends, what's been centuries of fiat currency, and we can't control or understand how it will innovate. But the goal is just to create a couple of stable regulations around it. I went down to PubKey the other night and talked with folks over there, and it was great. It's great to see also that focus on creating a social destination for an inherently non-physical technology. I think that's a really exciting place. And that should be open to everybody, as indeed it is. My guess is that, if that stable coins will be created over time. And as they need to make sure they've got the right kind of backing, that we need to just make sure that we're not pushing innovation overseas. That would be bad for the United States, for the American experiment. I think crypto will become a more common part of people's portfolios and usage. Because blockchain itself is such an innovative concept that offers an enormous amount of upside, far outweighing the downside. I mean, when I first started hearing about blockchain when I was running the Daily Beast, I was fascinated by it as a metered system of payments for digital news media, which is very difficult to monetize. I think there are all sorts of use cases that, some of which have been imagined, many of others that haven't. It's not for government to decide that. It's to create a stable framework within which for people to live their lives to the best of their ability. And so I have sort of let's establish that reasonable framework to create basic protections, and then it will continue to evolve in marvelous ways that, you may have imagined, but I certainly haven't. My kids the world's my kids will grow up and will be driven by it. Don't resist change. Channel it in a constructive direction.
Do you own any crypto, any Bitcoin or ETH?
I do. I've done through. I don't know what the rules are about talking about investments. Putting aside when I was working at IAC and they gave out Bitcoin at one retreat. I personally, I'm allowed to talk about investments. I don't want to overstate my investment in crypto, but ARK, Kathy Wood ARK, little exposure there, and the BlackRock ETF.
Nice. Okay. Well, yeah. And anything else to add that you want my audience to take away with?
Just that we cannot overstate the consequences of this election. They are bigger than any one single issue. They will define this election will define the trajectory of the 21st century, at home and abroad, at a time when there is an active struggle going on between democracies and autocracies. And that means all kinds of democratic norms and the ability to reason together using common sets of facts, protecting reproductive freedom, climate change, things we need to do coming together like immigration reform, finding broad bipartisan support for issues, because that's how you create stability and make progress. And that's true for something like immigration reform. That's true for something like crypto. And so I would just say again to folks, don't put on a jersey in this election. Vote for the person even more than the party. Look at what the policies are and how they care about. But think about the whole world you're creating and understanding there's a rising tide of generational change among Democrats who understand that we need clear, reasonable regulation around crypto. That none of us can allow this policy, this new technology to become partisan. So don't resist the temptation to feed into that narrative, because it'll only compound it. That will create further problems down the road. Let's come together, let's reason together, and let's build a great future together.
That's great to hear. It's a relief. I can't vote in this country yet.
But we'll welcome you when you can.
Yes. Okay. Well, obviously, I want what's best for the industry. So, if both parties are looking towards, clear regulation, that's great to hear. It's been such an uncertain time in the past few years that some clarity will definitely be welcome. And just to make sure what I understand what you think the risk is if Trump gets elected. Do you really think there's a risk of the U.S. becoming less free, or for like the U.S. democracy to be threatened?
We have never had a president in our nearly 50-year history who tried to actively stop and disrupt the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn an election on a lie that led to an attack on our Capitol, putting aside the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the crackdown on reproductive freedom, or the destruction of democratic norms, or any number of the ways that we have become a more divided and less civil society. And I understand the feedback loop between the extremes. I think we need to stop that. But tone comes to the top in any organization, as every entrepreneur knows. And, this isn't 2016. We have seen that what Donald Trump tried to do, we've learned more and more about it, was indifferent to his own vice president's life. How loyal do you think he's going to be to you? Let me ask you, you come from Chile. You understand that you can't take stable democracy for granted. I think a lot of Americans don't understand that.
And it is true that it can change. Things can change very quickly. Things can escalate, and you can go from democracy one day to a dictatorship the next day. But I also know, coming from Chile, that dictatorships and populism and autocratic government come from both sides. Mm-hmm. So we had an awful communist government, and then we had a dictatorship who Pinochet was more on the right. Not a fan of
communism or fascism.
So it's like, for me, I'm like, I'm looking at this from the outside. I like freedom. I like minimal government, because I've seen how bad government can be, again, like on both sides. So I'm for me, like I'm very skeptical about promises, right? So it's like I hear Trump, I know he's flip-flopped, I don't really trust what he's saying, but at the same time, I also saw Biden's track record. Kamala was his vice president, so I'm not really sure who to trust in this election.
I would say that somebody once said, a friend was talking about this, is who would you give the keys to your car to drive your kids to school? I mean, it's about character at the end of the day. If you have someone in your life who lies all the time and cheats their business partners, would you trust their word? Would you trust them? What you really want, it sounds like what your belief is a very informed view about the desire for a liberal democracy which maximizes individual freedom, consistent with a stable sense of community.
Yeah,
right?
basically.
Yeah, that's where most people are. That's where we need to be. And this policy debate we're having, we're going to evolve on, and we are evolving on, because the technology itself is evolving so fast. So I would just respectfully suggest that putting on a partisan jersey at this particular moment, thinking it's going to be good for short-term interests, was likely to be counterproductive in the fullness of time as well as in the near term.
Definitely
Let's
agree
reason
on
together.
that. Yep.
Okay.
Awesome. John,
Good talking
it was
with you.
Such a pleasure talking. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Take care.
You too.